No chance, Gary.
Yeah, because I often get about halfway through and I think, oh, I wish I'd recorded that. Because you never know. You never know what's going to happen. It's chaos, you see.
Part of the problem, Gianni, is that the human brain is half sociological, which has no common
Is what?
sense.
Is what?
Half sociological.
What do you mean?
It has no common sense. It just has animal emotions, and
Yeah.
it's pre-programmed to copy and mimic what it
Hmm.
sees around it most
Hmm.
often, so that cultures form. You
Hmm.
copy language, you copy behavior, and
Hmm.
cultures form. The trouble is, if you copy tradition, which is wrong, i.e., the study of systems in universities doesn't really exist to any level because there's no university which has a department which is searching for the links between all the others. So you're never going to find it.
Hmm.
You're happy with tradition. And we're all comfortable with tradition, but
Hmm.
it's never going to get you to anything new.
Hmm.
So in the book, once we, and the other thing is that you can look at something as a human being and not see what you're looking at. So I've been reading the book for at least 10 years and didn't realize until 6 days ago that it's the third part of physics. And I can state that it's physics because it's fundamental. There's no physics in the book. And yet it's a book all about the study of systems in nature, physical systems. There's only mathematical rules in the book. So you either try to make the book the same as physics, which you can't do, or you make physics the same as the book and say that physics is just matter and space following mathematical rules. That way, it all becomes consistent information. But it's very, very hard for any human being to listen to new information and take it on board in an instant. It you can only do it over weeks and months, and you do it bit by bit by bit, and you have more information which says the same thing, and more and more and more. But when I first, the last video we had, Gianni, you sat and listened. That's the important bit about your personality, which means that you can get this. You're willing to sit and listen.
Hmm.
And that's what human beings don't do. They always want to tell their own story,
Hmm.
which I've got to stop doing now. But if I try and give this information to physicists, one of them, an old physics professor, just burst into tears and said, I can't accept this.
Have you read the book by Paul Václavic and Frisch and who is it? Wakeland and Fish. It's called Change. In English, the title of the book is it's a very short book.
All right. I like this.
But it's, I think, one of the best book I ever read. In English, it's called Change: Principle of Problem Formation and Problem Resolution, and it's exactly explaining what you're talking about. It's the fundamental of my own work about managing change in human systems, in organizations, trying to understand how and why they resist to change. So I came to the same conclusion as you. It's
Right.
that there is a, in our behaviors, there is a logic, a kind of replication logic, and for survival reasons, for stability, it's much better to select only the things which fit your logic. Yeah, it's just normal. Whoa, something coming in which disturbs. No.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's keep it
yes, yeah,
simple. Yeah.
that's it.
But
Yeah.
sometimes I like to give the example of a man and a woman. They are made, or can be men and men or women and women. However, I'm married, so I know what happened to me. I met my wife, and we wanted to be together. I mean, there was no discussion about that. We even tried at the beginning not to get together because we are both married before, So,
Right.
but it happened. I mean, there was nothing to do. Like two masses that just are attracted, or electromagnetic magnets, and suddenly, after a year and a half, a child came. Popped into our system. Well, you can't say no to that thing which completely disturbs your life. So this is an example where you change, you profoundly transform yourself, because there's no way this very alien thing can be rejected. But what we do most of the time is that we reject everything which is alien to us. So I
do.
100% agree with you.
They're in institutions, but what I've found since I met people at the ISSS is that there are people out there who are willing to accept new ideas, who want new ideas, because we've got to have them. We can't go on with the old ways of just letting nature be in isolated departments. When you look out the window, it all works together. You can't have that. And I was brought up in the Catholic Church, and I realized it was a sham.
A what?
A sham. It wasn't real. When the man puts on a hat and says, "I've now got magic powers," we're all thinking. And then, even worse, that the priest from the school ran off with my girlfriend's mother, who had 10 children, and came into the church and declared she was in fact the Virgin Mary. So at that point, I lost all hope in adults and turned to science. But then when science fell apart in front of me, I said, this needs to be confronted. Because I was working on the problem of turbulence inside jet engines. And turbulence is not explained by any physics, but it's the same air. So you can't have that in science. It's the same air. So you've got laminar flow and then turbulence. They must have a common explanation. So that set me on a 30-year journey to find an answer. And guaranteed the answer would be the human unwillingness to accept new ideas or see new ideas. You can't see the wood for the trees. So once you realize that most of reality is based on non-linear dynamics, i.e. a bee's wing is completely flat, therefore it cannot fly according to the laws of physics. It flies according to the laws of chaos. But we don't even think about that. We don't care because it's not in our brain. Until somebody like me comes along and says, well, we need to think about this because I've been selling these ideas to industry for the last few years, and industry in Asia will accept them, but industry in the West won't. Isn't that strange? And industry in Asia, in Taiwan, who now make 90% of the world chips, were so enthusiastic to invite me in and say, how does chaos and physics work together? We want this. And that was it. They just used it. But I've never had any company in the West willing to even listen. So it's just the same old problem. If you don't look at evidence, you are scientifically derelict.
Scientifically what?
Derelict.
Which means?
It just means completely broken.
Mm.
If you went into a court of law and said, I don't want to see any evidence, just convict him. It's like, no, you can't do that. Because you will be caught out. Because in industry, if I get something wrong, I don't get paid. So I get caught out. I like that because I used to be a motorcycle racer and it's all honest. And I love the honesty. I've just left a job in academia because I couldn't stand the nonsense. Because I was banned from teaching about turbulence because it wasn't on the curriculum. Yet diesel engines can't work without it. And then I was banned from using the word books.
Books, like books.
Yes, and I was told I have to use the word paper-based resources. That's it. I'm off.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, it's
no.
very strange. It's very strange. That's why now I've been much on the same kind of journey. I think that you describe. Understanding that if change fails in organization, it's because of that. It's because people just see the world through their own lenses. And even when you say, oh, we must change this, they see what you're talking about in a different way than you, and things diverge. You know, it's like you're saying you should change the colors of the papers, but they understand it in another way. You know, and it's so hard to change these paradigms in organizations. And then I came to the point that, well, what's really important is that we don't try to sell, as you were saying. You know, we should stop selling our stuff. The only way to stop it is to start from scratch together. It's
Yes.
very much
Yes.
it's
Go
very
right
much
back to
about,
basics.
yeah, it's very much about, you know, like you know, Otto Scharmer's work on the theory U.
Mm.
No, and you, Gary, you probably
Heard
do.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's from the MIT. Otto Scharmer is how do you call it? He was there was Peter Senge. You know Peter Senge?
I heard the name, but I haven't read the book.
You don't know?
Oh,
Okay.
Fifth Discipline. That's good stuff.
The
That.
Fifth Discipline, very good stuff. Yeah, very basic. When you go into system thinking for organizations, and Otto Scharmer was, how do you say that, Gary? A disciple of Peter Senge.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah.
He continued his work, but he brought it to something much less. Well, I heard interviews of Peter Senge. He's very open-minded, incredibly open-minded, but his Fifth Discipline is not so open-minded. It's more about, you know, making a sort of solid theory about what to do. And the MIT with Otto Scharmer went further. They really say, no, there's no way you can really define. It's more about chaos, you know. So how do we handle this chaos? And they said, well, we should connect to something, you know, deep inside and deep and far outside ourselves. And we should get together and create the new futures. And the way they do it is really to say, you should co-initiate things. But you have to root your creative energy into deep sensing.
Right.
You don't have to bring to connect it to your brain and your way of thinking. You have really to connect to this source of energy which tends to emerge into new futures. And it's a sort of very holistic, you know, there is a lot of not meditation, but this mindfulness things. And I'm not 100% comfortable with this. But I went on the course of the Presencing Institute, which is called the U Lab. And it was extremely interesting, not so much about the theory, but they put us into practice. And we join into circles where we start from scratch and just bring things together, seeing what comes out, actually. What putting 5 people together with their own stuff, but mixing everything together, what comes out? Are they common things they want to realize? Are they things like that? And it's incredibly interesting. And I think that's one of the things, I don't know, Gary, what you would say about that, but that's one of the things which I'm missing in ISSS. And I suggested that to Rulian when we saw each other in Warwick at the OR conference. I said, you should give space to co-creation. Everybody I met in ISSS are just the most clever people I've ever spent time with. You know, it's so amazing. But they are all working on their things.
Yeah.
And when you put them together, they try to find a rational common way, or what would be the you know, how can my thing influence yours, and how can your things maybe influence mine? And that's I don't think that's worthful, you know.
What's worthwhil, Gianni, is that we get back to true science, which is everything has to be referenced to repeatable experiment. So when chaos comes along, which nobody's expecting, it's all referenced to repeatable experiment. It's bedrock science. So the book which Gary has is all as repeatable experimentally as classical physics. Now that's a big deal. because everything in the book is completely unknowable as an answer. It's a different kind of mathematics, but it's just the mathematics you need to explain biology. Because when a baby's born, it must be a blank slate, so it can adapt to any culture in which it's born. So that's the example that people say, yeah, I can get that. But because chaos hasn't been understood, it's been pushed aside. And the people who've got it, I used to sell this information in industry to people who make things like vaccines. And they used to say, what's a virus in universal terms? Brilliant. Because a virus comes out the periodic table. Human beings crawled out of the periodic table. That needs an explanation. And there's no explanation on the earth yet which can do that. But the people I work with are quite happy to talk about that every day.
Well,
so there
are explanations. It's just they're not commonly accepted.
They're not commonly accepted. Yeah.
Go further.
The Origin and Nature of Life on Earth by Morovitz. This is one of the things that George quotes quite often.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the thing about life is what you've got to do is you've got to explain life and explain the second law of thermodynamics at the same time without ending up in contradiction. That's the difficulty, but that can now be done. And the people who are using this information completely go 10 times faster than what they've done before and leave everybody else behind. So what happens is it's like when the Japanese motorcycles came along and completely outperformed British motorcycles. The industry was dead in 5 years and it was the biggest on the earth. It's outperforming things. So you've got to put together physics with the self-organization of matter without ending up in contradiction.
Say it again.
You've got to put together physics, the second law of thermodynamics, which says everything just falls apart, with the self-organization of matter without ending up in contradiction. We can now do that, but it takes people who are very open-minded, very receptive to sitting and not getting it the first time, but trying again and trying again. It's like practicing the piano. It's 99% practice, 1% performance.
Yeah, well, we talked about that last time. I don't remember who was sitting in the meeting, but one of my, how do you say that in English? You know, those enlightenment moments was because I of course, I was, how do you say?
Eureka, a eureka moment.
Eureka, yeah, was when I was learning about entropy and negentropy and all those stuff that were completely alien to me before. And I had this struggle. Yeah, but how does it work if everything falls apart? Why do we have things that we still see? And suddenly I put that the things in my head in the other. I reversed the way I was thinking, just by saying that, well, actually there are many things that probably don't exist because of entropy. Well, the only ones that we observe are the ones which have this amazing principle to be stronger than entropy for a while.
To self-organize. In fact, can I have a go, Gianni, explaining the entropy and negative entropy contradiction? Because negative entropy must be positive self-organization of matter. That's really logical. But you can't get at that with any physics, because physics by itself is extremely simple and only goes towards entropy. But chemistry and biology go way beyond physics with layers and layers of mathematical laws which are not physics, that leave entropy way behind and just get on with self-organization. So once you've moved on to a mathematical universe, instead of just fundamental forces which cannot be, because Einstein's already thrown out gravity as a force, so you're done on that argument. If you've thrown out a gravitational field as a force, you've got to throw out a magnetic field as a force and say the geometry or mathematics of space outside the magnet has changed. You don't have to put iron filings into it to see that's true. That's not me saying that, that's Michael Faraday. And it's very important that the examples which I use are not me, they're somebody famous. Because your sociological part of the brain wants fame, it wants fanfare, and wants ceremony. Well, I've got none of those to offer. I've just got evidence.
Well, we had some sharing, Gary and I, about the way we see the topography of the energetic world. That was I can't remember, a Sunday early morning, Gary.
Yeah, we've had some good conversations.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Because also one of my Eureka moments was about my wife. Because she has been a professional sports
Right.
For a long time. She went to the two Olympics, and so she continues. She's 51 now, and she continues running around all the time, up and down. And so she wants to encourage me, say, oh, let's go quickly to that, peak or somewhere. And I'm like, oh my God, that requires so much energy for me. And suddenly Eureka, actually for her, climbing that mountains is like going down for her energetically. It's the best choice for her. It's like a sort of going down depression. Okay, physically in space terms, it goes up, but for her, everything else would be much more hilly and climbing. And for me, the slope is sitting in front of my computer, reading and writing. That goes down for me. Everything else goes up.
Well, I've learned to spend 5 times as much time thinking before I say a single sentence. And I walk a dog like 4 hours a day just to come up with one sentence that makes sense, because it's worth everything's a trade-off in the universe. Everything.
A trade-off means?
It means you swap one thing for another.
Mm-hmm.
A lever, I swap force for distance. Mm-hmm. Or you swap the strength of the electromagnetic charge for the strength of gravity, and that gives you a star and elements coming into being. And it's the fact that they're different makes them work together. So that's why I went to live in Asia for 20 years, because Western thinking is there must be one set of physical laws, when now we realize there must be 3: quantum mechanics, classical mechanics, chaotic mechanics, because you need 3 of everything, 3 colors to make all the rest of the colors, 3 different kinds of particles to make all the particle physics, 3 different codons to make all the information in DNA, 3 different kinds of eukaryotes, animals, plants, and fungi, 3 different kinds of elements in molecules that make life, CO2, H2O, and then sugar. It's all these pairs and triplets which just add up and add up and add up. But it's lots and lots of thinking, lots and lots of being prepared to accept new ideas. And until I came across ISSS, nobody would even listen to me. But I do work with a professor who's so highly regarded in Asia, but he's not allowed to speak out in his own university. So he plays the game, and we've got to stop playing the game. We've got to get back to science is outside of human social behavior. It's just what can be proved to be true. So once we get back to that, we can get back to being human beings and to be happy. All we have to do is what we did 20,000 years ago, is sit around the campfire with some friends and family, a jug of wine, some bread, and that's it, and some music. So it's a great reset, really, which is what I've done. Because if I didn't reset, I would have gone completely nuts. Because I've been married twice, but my second marriage to an Asian lady, her sister took her to a fortune teller who said that I was a scientific fraud, even though I sell my information to industry to make a living, and that I'd spent all the family money on prostitutes, and she believed it and then left me on the spot. So the scientist was vanquished by the fortune teller. But it's turned out to be a really good thing in the end. So I'm much, much happier now. But it's the fact that people can be so duped by complete nonsense. And a lot of politics that goes on at the minute is just people who are confident and play the game, get themselves into social situations that can say whatever they want, like Donald Trump. It's just a game. And we can't have that. Humanity must get beyond the social game and get into, where's the science? Where's the mathematical proofs? Because the mathematical proofs written in Euclid's Elements were written in 200 BC, and they're still as true today as when they were written. That's the only book on the earth which is like that. It's not the Bible we should have paid attention to. It's Euclid's Elements.
Is the what?
Euclid's Elements. It's the first mathematical book which is full of proofs, which are all just as true today as they were when they were written 200 BC. That's a big thing to get hold of. So Poincaré's proof that there are no solutions to 3 equal bodies in space moving means there is no physics which will ever explain the motion of 3 bodies in space if they're of equal size. So if there's no physics which can do that, you have to see chaos as the third kind of physics, because everything comes in 3 before you get to everything else. And there's a proof, there's a mathematical proof. Well, we have to get back to using them because they're so important. They've never once failed us, humanity. But we're not using them. We're not using consistency of information either. The periodic table is completely consistent internally. But what's underneath it is inconsistent. So we have to throw it out and replace it with something which is consistent with the periodic table. That's just basic logic. So what? Sorry.
Question.
Yeah.
For me, at the Earth level, there is a very critical thing to solve now, which is about humanity and ecosystems. How do you relate your this journey, research, thinking, proving to that challenge, to this challenge?
That's the big one, Jeremy. It's the most important thing, is does it relate to human behavior? And the answer is yes, it does. We are just part of the universe, so we must be built on pairs and triplets of behavior. So once you start to give that to people, and I already work with people who've been serious drug addicts and in prison, and you can completely change their behavior in 6 months. So the local prison, once they saw that, invite us in and say, sort this mess out. But I think when it comes to education, I'm not allowed to go and sort the mess out, which education has become, because it's just based on a curriculum which is unsuitable for half the population. Well, you can't have that. If I can improve something, like Japanese motorbikes completely outperform British motorbikes, people want something which outperforms what they've got. They must be given a choice. So just to show you how it works in really, really basic forms, human beings' most basic drives must be a pair of triplets. So survival is number one of any system, whether it's a star or a human being or an insect running from your boot. Survival of the self, survival of the genes, survival of the group. So survival of the genes is sex, because it keeps the system going. Survival of the group is war. And sex and war turn out to be the same mathematics. That's not coincidence. So I'd love to do a video on the mathematics of sex and war, because when you show people the geometry which is behind sex and war, it's the same geometry. And human beings have known that for thousands of years. It's very, very powerful. And as long as people don't say, I don't want to go there, I want the science, I want the mathematics. When you show it to students, they love it because it makes sense to them. So the mathematics of sex and war is like a magnet. It's polarized. And it's the most powerful emotions that we ever get. And we're prepared to die for both.
I think that John is with us.
Yeah.
John's with us. John, can you turn your camera on? We can't see you.
Still setting up.
Still
Right.
setting up.
So he'd be like me at the beginning, trying to get on.
He'll be sorting out his camera and microphone.
What I'd like to do, Dan, is to introduce you to people who have got this information and use it every day. And it's quite normal for them to have a picture of nature which is sensible, which all fits together like a giant crossword puzzle. And there's no contradictions. It's just, that's it, it's done. But it's virtually impossible to give that to any human being without the sociological part of the brain saying, I shouldn't be hearing this. It's too unusual. I've won the lottery. The first thing you say is, I don't believe it. Well, ignore that because you have won the lottery. Now let's do the science. And that's when it gets going, because a discussion starts like this, in which you hold me to account and I learn from you. And since I've joined IISS, I've learned so much about how to say things, which is equally as important as, you can't just give people logic. You've got to learn how to say it. And because people like Gary will engage me and tell me this works and this doesn't work, I'm getting somewhere. But I'm not alone in this. I work with 4 other people who know all the stuff inside out, but it's got to be a collective endeavor of people who say, I want something new, I want something that works. I want a Japanese motorbike, not a British one. Because this outperforms what's gone before. I want it referenced to scientific experiment. I want it referenced to mathematical proof. And I want it internally and externally consistent. Then I'll know it's something that outperforms everything that's gone before. So it's like having a big deal that you can't give to anybody, because it's like trying to give them AIDS. It's just so difficult. So what the small group of people I have, what we need is help. People to tell us, if I give you something, what worked and what didn't work? Just be brutal with us. Tell us what doesn't work and what does work. And then that helps us to give it more effectively to people. Because we can't go on with science not making any sense and the public trusting the scientists. They're losing faith in who do you believe on climate change? It's a difficult one because the climate is unpredictable in long term. The solar system is like a clock, it's completely predictable. You've got to have an explanation for both, which we've got. But unless you can show how they work as a working partnership, not a contradiction, nobody will understand what's going on. So the moon Hyperion of Saturn wobbles chaotically on a classical orbit. So you've got to have chaos and classical mechanics as a working partnership to explain the solar system. It wobbles chaotically on a classical orbit. And the two can't be the same mathematics, but you must have the two. So the reason I went to live in Asia was to learn to think in paradoxes. Hello, John.
Hello.
Hi, John.
Hi. How are you
Hey.
doing? Sorry I came in late. I just got the message.
That's all right. How are you? You keeping all right?
Doing good. This is I've been with my mom here for 7 days now, helping her adapt to the new surroundings, and she's done very, very well. It's a
Good.
nice huge library.
It's a nice place. Yeah.
It is. It's very. and
Just
they're-
let you know the recording's on.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're just having a general chat about things at the moment.
So, John, I hear, are you a mathematician?
I'm going to stop my video so I get better bandwidth, and I can also hold the phone closer to hear you. Hold on. Yeah, say that again.
Are you a mathematician?
No, not as such. I started in math physics in undergraduate, and then I went into geophysics, and I worked for the federal government as a physical scientist for 27 years, and then I retired. But in the meantime, I also did my advanced work, master's and PhD in ecology and environment. So I was sort of a changed fields there. I went from physics to ecology, which now I think is a great combination.
Which I would agree with you, it is, yeah. I know things need put to it. I'm not a natural mathematician. I use a natural mathematician to help me in my work. I just go to him and ask for everything. Say, what's this? What's that? You know. And I think that's the secret of life, because I have somebody else. I have no short-term memory because of a motorcycle accident. So I have somebody who is my short-term memory, but I have to work with them every day.
Right.
I think it just works. It's just, that's the way we should all work. Is what you're lacking, go and find somebody else who
can do it.
work with you.
Yeah. Our connection isn't very good. There's a quite a big echo.
I'll turn my video off as well.
All right. So, Johnny, what I'd like to do is to introduce you and Gary and John to the other people who work with me, because they're very, very interesting. They're completely different, and I think that's the secret. Like John said, he works in different fields. It's learning to work in different. It's the difference between things that makes them work together. Whether that's a marriage or a university, but we've been too obsessed with, I'm a physicist and I only think about physicists. I'm a biologist and I only think about biology. Hang on a minute, you're both studying the same matter. So that's not valid. But it's very human.
The problem is that they each study nature in a different way.
Yes.
With filter. And so far we haven't come up with a universal philosophy that would combine them or allow them to make the right connections between the fields. So the physicists I talk to, who I understand very well from my background, are really quite narrow in their view of the world.
Very, very narrow. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet they believe and get lots of support for the idea that physics is fundamental to everything. And
That's not true, John, is it? Because we all know that the only thing that about physics, about my body, is that my bones behave as levers. I fall over under gravity, and I'm held together by electromagnetism. But that's it.
yeah,
So there's something else that you're not thinking about.
right. The problem is that they believe that that's true, and so that restricts them from considering or recognizing or even being polite to anyone talking about the mind and the mind-body relation, because there's absolutely no way to represent subjectivity in physics, and probably not in mathematics either. Rosen made the point that there is no question mark in mathematical symbols.
That's
I
interesting.
would agree exactly with that, John. But I'd like to introduce some new information in that the laws of chaos, which are as scientific as the laws of quantum mechanics and classical mechanics, because they're as experimentally testable as both. There's a question mark.
Yeah. If you want to present something, Peter, you feel free. I know you. I don't know if John saw the presentation that you shared with me, about a month or so ago. Did you have a
Yep.
chance to see that, John? It was a recording I did for it.
I don't think so. This month has been totally crazy. I haven't had
A very understandable.
breakfast.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to share it, Peter, as a vehicle for sharing, then that would be fine.
Share this. If I can
So I think I know that John will find what you shared with me, interesting.
share screen. Let's have a look at that. So if you let's. Here we go, John. Can you see that?
Yeah, I see it.
So what we've got here is a completely new way of thinking about science, in that we've got the laws of chaos as a working partner to the laws of classical physics. And the reason this is important is because that is a mirror of quantum mechanics, which has the Schrödinger equation, which is completely deterministic, completely predictable. And as soon as you add one more component into the system, i.e., a detector, the old system collapses, and you go into the collapse of the wave function. Well, that's the same as two bodies in space, which is classical physics, going over to three equal-sized bodies in space, which is complete chaos, at exactly the same place. You just add one more component to the system. But then you get a predictable pattern of the composite, of the composition of all the actions, which is the interference fringes on the screen from the wave function collapsing. You've no idea where the photon or the electron will land, but you get a predictable pattern. And then classical physics collapsing at three bodies in space. And a combination of the both gives you the logistic maps in chaos, which are in the third column. And that's reflected in biology. The complex scale, where asexual behavior, which has one single possible outcome, collapses completely when you move over to sexual behavior, where you have unknowables, and you must have a 50-50 chance of it being male or female to get an even distribution in population. So Einstein famously said, God does not play dice. But Mendel's experiments with peas and sexual behavior is nature playing dice. It's purely probabilistic. A 1 in 4 chance of getting a red flower instead of white flowers, 50-50 chance of getting male or female. And it has to be that way to get the distributions you want in nature. So it's a completely new way of thinking, John, which has come out of industry, which sounds bizarre, but just because it's bizarre doesn't mean to say we should turn it down. We turn it down because it doesn't work logically.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at that and see where I would put the relational theory. And I actually think I'm not quite sure that I would begin with I would begin certainly with the quantum reality, but we don't know what that is. And so actual quantum physics is a way of approaching it probabilistically and with a few other approaches like path integrals and things like that. We're still not seeing the quantum reality and maybe never can. So there's something to the right of your 3 boxes there, 3 columns, that determines the probabilities. And I think the relational theory sits there.
Well, relational theory, John, may be the way forward because people in the West see the entities. People in the East, and I lived there for 20 years to learn this, see the relationship as the unit of the universe. How different is that? So the relationship between classical physics and chaos is what's important. It's not one or the other, it's the yin and the yang.
Yeah. Well, so the key, I think, is when you have a cyclical causality.
Yes.
So,
yeah, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
And so then that can be a self-determining system. And that's something that's capable of producing the quantum probabilities that are then enumerated and calculated in quantum physics.
Well, what's important about the cyclic ideas, John, is that if you've got cycles in chaos and physics which produce these logistic maps, you don't get complexity. You only get systems which go in and out of order and disorder. To get complexity, you need to add another layer of mathematics, which is the conservation of information.
Say it again, the what?
The conservation of information.
Yes, right. Conservation of information is key in the theory.
That allows complexity to build up. If information is lost, you just get a chaotic system.
Right. Well, you get a one-way system.
Yeah, that doesn't explain biology.
Yeah. So the cyclical causality that I'm talking about involves 4 causes, and it creates a mathematical problem where you can't connect the pairs of causes. So you have the material view that we generally follow in most of physics of state and dynamics, and that's something that's measurable. It's a measurable aspect of reality. And then you have what we would consider the mental type of causality, which is final and formal. And it's possible to infer order in both domains. So we have the traditional natural laws and state and dynamics in physics and so on, Newton's laws, and then, okay, those aren't exact. And so now we have quantum laws, but it's still all state dynamics with now the exception of uncertainty. And we quantify uncertainty rather than explain it. But then you go to the other side, the final formal, now you have potentials and you have Venn diagrams overlapping each other. and it's not a discrete world. It's an overlapping qualitative world. And what I've determined is that the the space and time coordinates only apply to the dynamical side, and the other side, which is mental causation, the final formal entailment, is outside of those coordinates. It's outside of space and time, and it can only be called non-local. Well, they're just now getting to a sense of what non-local might mean, and even the physicists are very uncomfortable with it and keep trying to get rid of it. But it appears that they won't be able to.
I agree completely, John. Can I have a go at defining non-local? If you take a game of chess, you can see all the pieces, you can see the board, but the rules are nowhere to be seen. They're outside the picture.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so all the and they don't get that. So if you're doing physics and you say, yeah, it's very exact science, and we have all these mathematical equations, and I say, okay, well, where in nature are the equations? And they just look at you like you're crazy. Well, if the equations do something, or at least refer to something in nature that does something, like some sort of limitation on what can happen, then they're part of nature. Where are they? Well, they're like your chessboard and the rules of the board.
They're part of nature, John, and that's what's missing. Because here's an axiom which is very hard to argue with. The mathematical patterns which define nature could not be there unless nature was using the mathematics which makes the patterns. That's a bottom line one.
Or something even prior to the mathematics that we can know. But yeah, something like the mathematics. It's doing that. It's doing what we call mathematics, and probably more.
And I think mathematics is just information. So if we move over to an information-driven universe rather than fundamental forces, because empty space can't apply a force to a planet, one magnet can't apply a force to another magnet without touching it, we've got to move over to something else. And there's only mathematics which is any contender for anything that's different.
Yeah.
Does the geometry of space change outside a magnet? Well, just put some iron filings into the space and you'll see that it has. But because it's not part of a tradition, well, we just want to go on teaching tradition, but people know it's wrong. It doesn't add up.
Yeah. And so it's, the conversations that I get into with most scientists is that, well, science has been very successful in predicting a lot of things and giving us technology and explaining medicine and on and on and on. I say, yeah, absolutely. There's no contradiction with anything that's been. But the thing is, by focusing on what we have been able to explain, we're closing the door to new things that we now need to explain, like why the human world is dissolving into a polarity and a crisis.
Very good, John. Very good. That's really important what you just said, because the human world dissolving into a polarity is a mathematical signature in chaos theory. The system is about to change.
Yeah.
So that's very good, John. Very good.
Yeah, and the thing is, how much in ecology, there's studies of how ecosystems change, and there's you may be aware of the field called panarchy. It's typically drawn with a figure-8 diagram going through 4 quadrants, and those don't directly relate to the hold-on idea that I have, but they do, because the 4 quadrants are the contexts, and the ribbon that forms a figure 8 moving through those 4 sort of paradigms, contextual paradigms, is the actual system itself. So the system is changing strategy through 4 different types, and it's going from an organization to optimization and
that's an important one to say. Optimization. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, it dissolves and then it reorganizes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so the question now that I have is, we are reorganizing into a different system.
Yeah, yeah.
The question is, can we do that intelligently and keep the things, the institutions and technologies that we've developed so far, or do we want that to take place purely through natural processes without our conscious awareness of it, in which case the system will collapse back to fundamental elements. And
that's really important, John, what you've just said, because in chaos, if systems don't adapt to new behavior, they always go extinct.
Yeah,
so
and the relation theory, extinction is not required for change. It's possible to change from one self-sustaining closed causal system, cyclical causality, into another one. You can do it through total destruction and reorganization, or you can do it much more subtly through one of the quadrant influences and simply change the system in a graceful and smooth way. That's what I'm trying to promote.
I think that's the way forward, John, because the way human beings are, unless you do it gracefully, and it's got to be beautiful, that's the big deal. People want it.
Just make an observation in that we're all changing through this conversation at the moment gracefully. Yeah, we're not going extinct when we change. So it's a good example, I think.
It is a good example, Gary. Yeah, well done.
And it's one that doesn't have a solid theory behind it that I know of, except, and I don't want to claim the territory, but the hold-on theory does explain that and does give us a handle on that. But I don't know of anything else that does.
Yeah, I agree, John.
John, just give us a hold-on theory, because I'm new to all this.
Well, the thing about it is you have to, how you dissect the world, is the fundamentals of what theory you'll then construct. And so you get the fundamental terms of reference. And these days, most of the sciences have gone away from the language of causality. So if you start talking causality, their eyes glaze over and say, well, that's kind of, 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But that's because they think that causality means Newtonian type of causes, exact causes, efficient causes.
Yeah, that's gone. Yeah.
So classical physics is basically efficient cause and material state. But in the ancient philosophy, going back 10,000 years, there were 4 causes. Aristotle didn't invent that. He simply tried to interpret it, and he got a lot of it wrong, but he got a lot of it right too. And then after Aristotle, they just took what was confusing and threw it away and kept the state and dynamics and built classical physics. And then classical physics proved to be too limited. Yep. And so now we have quantum physics, but we still haven't recovered all 4 causes. Final cause is just not in the picture at all.
I can show you a diagram if you want to talk through it, John.
Yeah, sure.
I've got one of your originals, which I haven't messed with. Just give me a second. Yeah, can you see that one?
Yeah, there you go. So that Q4 is
sorry, I still have the new model of nature I don't have the picture from John.
Okay. Hang
Let
on.
me just cancel that one. Maybe it's me.
I saw it.
Yeah, try again.
You just it probably just have to wait
Yeah,
for it.
I have it.
There we
Have it. So Q4 is final cause. Now that is completely out of current science. And so once you do that, if you take that quadrant away, you can see that you have a hierarchy, Q3, Q2, Q1. And Q3 is the chaotic or uncertainty.
John, just can you explain why you use the Q letter
Quadrant.
as quadrant? Okay, yeah.
Just coincidental, Jody.
Coincidental, yeah.
It's
Excellent.
quite nice though.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, my next car is going to be an Audi Q5 because the whole cycle is quadrant 5, which of course is a paradox.
Yeah, of course.
Which is both disorder and also the whole system, yeah.
Yeah. So, but with Q4 missing, what you have is a hierarchy, and that's just why we have the traditional idea of God at the top and dead matter at the bottom. But it isn't a hierarchy when you add that final cause. Then you get what's known in the East as karma. You get a feed forward of previous actions, reconfiguring the whole system so that new things are possible or certain things are made probable. So you're now Q4 is what determines the probabilities. And it closes, that's what closes the loop. And once you close that loop, now you have a whole different kind of system than anything that physics has ever studied.
Well, that's absolutely true, John, because what you've got now is a future which is not predetermined by physics.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really important, is that human choices are important because the future is unwritten.
That's right.
Physicists would say the future is all predetermined.
Well,
The shell lands in one place. But that's not true, because in biology, it must not be predetermined. It has to be a blank slate, but it must also obey all the laws of physics. So you've got to do both. You've got to obey the laws of physics and be a blank slate.
Right.
Well, that's okay. A baby can do that. It does obey the laws of physics, but the laws of physics don't allow you to adapt to anything.
That's right.
well, current laws of
They're
physics, perhaps.
completely blind.
Well, the
to
laws of
adaptation.
physics, what I'm saying with chaos is that chaos is the third part of physics. And in John von Neumann's book on, it was on the parlor games and economics. It's like, oh, goodness me.
Yeah.
And then Schrodinger's book, What is Life? He says there's something missing from physics to explain biology. Absolutely true. And Roger Penrose has for the last 2 decades been saying there's a missing part of physics which explains biology. There is a missing part of physics. It's called chaos. And it's as scientific as the 2 other parts of physics, but because you want one single kind of physics, because you're Western, you can't accept it.
Would you do it at breakfast? Oh, this is the.
We're still gonna.
Pardon me 1 second. I'm sorry.
We're still gonna keep the same routine?
Yeah.
10:30, okay.
Yeah. You're right. That's the antibiotic. Yeah.
Hi, Marlene. You're so peaceful.
This is the antibiotic. Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, sorry. I meant to mute myself and I muted you
That's
instead. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. We've been managing things minute to minute here. Give me 1 second.
You Gary,
Yes.
when you look at this diagram,
Mm.
you understand it.
I have an interpretation of it which allows me to make sense of it.
Okay, because
So
the
I
whole
might not
purpose of
underst-
this
Yeah.
meeting we are trying to have,
Yeah.
if I'm right, were to organize a tutorial from John.
Yeah.
Because I feel, I have a feeling of something because of the connection
Yeah.
with my work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I still don't
Yeah, no, I
know
see.
or understand it enough.
I see the pattern of everything here. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
Jeremy,
back.
it's very important that you trust your feelings.
Yeah.
Because
Let me try to.
they're
This diagram is a really good one to show, Gary.
Yeah.
Let me just try to talk through it a little bit to
Please.
give everybody a better feel for it. So you have a closed cycle here going counterclockwise of the traditional four causes, the perennial four causes, we could say. I'm using Aristotle's terms for it, but some of his descriptions have to be a little bit different. So like final cause has been considered to be purpose. Well, you see, that's because if you take that Q4 out of the picture, you have a hierarchy from the top to the bottom and then destruction. And so you have a purpose at the top, and people associate that with God or divinity or higher mind or whatever, wherever purpose comes from. It's in figuring, okay, what is final cause? Because we can't work with purpose scientifically as a cause itself. And I reasoned that, well, if I ever think of my purpose, any particular goal or purpose, anything that I would define, I can't do that without having some image of the future in my head. You know, if I say, I'm going to move to Chicago, immediately I have an image of what Chicago might look like based on what Los Angeles looked like and things I've heard that might be different. And I know there's a lake there. And so I imagine my brain puts a lake on top of Los Angeles to make Chicago. And, I create an image of it. And so
that would be W2, sorry.
That,
W4.
yeah. So that's
sorry.
what, so I decided it's really an exemplary. It's you have an exemplar that's created from which you've already experienced the sensory state, the material cause, stuff you've already seen and measured and defined. You use that as an example of what might come in the future. And from that example, then we create a model, which is Q3. And this is your formal cause. Well, it's the same as all your natural laws. The natural laws are the model that nature follows, or at least the model that we have that seems to correlate with what nature is doing. And then you have the model determines through functions, F there, determines the actions that take place. And then the actions determine the conditions or state of the world. And then those states become future exemplars. So that's the cycle here. And the beauty of this holon is if you look at the arrows, I have dashed arrows on the top and a solid arrow on the bottom. So the bottom is indicating the measurable material world that we think is solid. And the dashed arrow is indicating the more what we call abstract mental world that appears to be, well, it's not measurable, you can experience it. And then if you look at the axes, the vertical axis is the ontology. You have local and non-local ontology glued together by the horizontal axis, which is information and its knowledge. So you have structure and function ends up being the epistemological elements of science. So you have science and what we think is real, the ontology, represented and coming right out of this one diagram.
Could I just say, John, that this is really powerful stuff, and the solid arrows on the bottom, where you've got something which is real that you can experience, and then the arrows on the top is just a universal principle that everything is just a relationship between matter and space. Space has no material part. It only has mathematical concepts to describe it. But that's valid because the relationship between matter and space is gravity. So mind and body, the relationship between mind and body is the same as the relationship between matter and space. There's nothing else. It's really as base as that. So it's a very powerful way to show that what's important is the relationship between what is physical and what isn't, but is equally valid.
Yeah. And of course, physicists, if they ever adopt a model like this and represent the non-local as an entailed system in the same way that the local is entailed, then they will want to call both physical. That's fine. I don't care what they call it, you know. But the thing is, we have both are entailment domains. But the problem now is mathematics itself is not complete enough. And can't be complete
it's
enough.
not understood enough, because if you look at going back to what you just said about things being physical and non-physical, if you've got a coordinate in mathematics, you know exactly where it is, but it has no physical presence. It has mathematical presence only. So that's valid.
We give it a mathematical description, but see, one of the problems that has arisen in discussing this whole on with a pure mathematician is that they say, and I agree, that there is no mathematical entailment between the top and the bottom here, between the non-local and the local. So right,
isn't the mathematical entailment the relationship between top and bottom, left and right, front and back?
So the relationship,
what's important?
Q3 and Q2, which I'm calling function, you can't create a mathematical map between the elements of Q3 and the elements of Q2. It's a fuzzy map. It's a many-to-many relation. Yet there is a connection. What I'm calling it now is an analogy. There's an analogy between the mind and the body, and I think nature actually works on the principle of analogies between these two domains.
But isn't the fuzzy connection, the quantum connection that we all need to introduce into our lives to see that we're all male and female at the same time? All men have nipples, but can only produce male sex cells. So we're binary and quantum at the same time.
Yeah. But these so that horizontal axis is where you have information relations, and that's what I call, I use a reserved word relation for that upward moving arrow, downward moving arrow structure and function.
Well,
and
I agree, John. So when you're using the word information, sorry, Gianna, information can be both binary and quantum, and both are valid, but the Western mind just wants the binary.
Right. Well, see, I have my own way of thinking of information, which is more like Gregory Bateson. And I don't think of information as a substance or package. I think as a process.
Yeah.
So that S and F,
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
it's a translation between the material world
Yes,
and the mental world.
it's a relationship between the material world and immaterial. Absolutely, that's what gravity is, John. A relationship between matter and space.
I think so, yeah. Now, as far
Spiral.
as words themselves, I try to get specific there too. So where I reserve the word relation for that information relation going up and between these hemispheres, what most of physics does is it ignores the dashed arrow, the upper part, the mind,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
certainly classical physics ignores that. So it goes from state, and somehow it says, well, a state somehow exerts a new function. Well, that's what Schrodinger, you mentioned Schrodinger and what is life. That's what he said. Problem. He
Yeah.
says, we know how a function creates a state, but we don't know how a state creates a function. We just assume that it does. So when somebody does that, they short circuit the top and you get classical physics.
Yeah.
I call that a relationship because it's being shipped through the mental domain and ignored. And so if I ship a package from China to the United States, everybody forgets about the ocean. They just got the package. So
Well, that's an important way to think, that human minds can't look at everything at once. So we're fatally flawed,
yeah,
absolutely flawed to deal with reality. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to get there. We are going to get there. We will do it.
John, can I
Yeah.
ask a question about your use of the term information?
Yeah.
So would you agree that everything in the universe has an ability to process information?
Yes, I might say it differently.
Mm.
I might say everything in the universe is the process, is an information process, because you say processing information, it's a verb and a noun, but information isn't a noun, it's a verb.
Okay.
Gary, could I comment on that one?
Mm.
This is really important. When you use the word process information, that's the big word, because the molecules of air in this room all flip when they meet each other, and that's information changing, which is in Boltzmann's equation, but the information is not processed.
Yeah.
So biology processes information, which means it understands it and moves it on to something bigger. But the second law of thermodynamics, which is just physics, doesn't process information.
Yeah.
That's a really important distinction.
So the way I use the term information is actually as an event that makes a difference. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely spot on, Gary. So
Yeah,
information, that's it. It's a new way of saying the word force. Force is simply the transmission of information that causes change. It's not a force.
But see, again, our language defeats us because
it does.
There is no transmission of information. Information is the transmission.
All bosons do is transmit information.
Yeah, but there's nothing called information that is transmitted. There is a state in the material domain that is translated into a state in the mental domain, and that translation is the verb process of information, of informing. So it's not information, it's informing. We have a bad word. We're turning it into now.
We need new understanding of language, because if you move to Jupiter in the universe, in the solar system, everything else would move and conserve the information that Jupiter had moved. That's really important at the gravitational scale.
Yeah.
It's really important that you have the conservation of information, because you have the conservation of information at the atomic scale. Because if a neutron turns into a proton, that's conserved in the formation of the elements.
Right.
So that's really important. So those two conservation laws need to be put into Noether's principle in physics. They're not there.
I read so there's a couple of points I'd like to make. So I absolutely agree with you that our language limits us currently, because you know we know that knowledge is structured information, you know, from Shannon and all of that. Yeah. Now, if there are informational events which have changed something, yeah, then that change something has a change in its knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I know, you know, the word isn't appropriate, but every single thing in the universe is structured information. Yeah, it's everything in the universe is knowledge.
Hang on, Gary. Hang on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and the word knowledge obviously has a huge hang up.
Yes. Yeah.
Because everyone equates it to people.
Yeah.
Right.
And people are fatally flawed.
Yeah.
Right.
So
See,
there's,
here
yeah,
on
those,
language, I have knowledge, two kinds of knowledge. They're natural. That's part of every system.
Yeah.
So this is a diagram of human activity. This is a diagram of all natural activity.
Yes. Yeah,
and
great.
humans simply borrowed it through evolution.
Yeah.
And enhanced it.
Yeah. And the other thing, so I can't remember where I read it, but I know we've mentioned the conservation of information a few times. And I've read somewhere, and I can't remember the particular theory, but it's, you know, the entropy in the universe is somehow related to loss of information.
Yes.
Right.
That's in the book, Gary.
Okay.
That you just got. Yeah,
Okay.
It's really important to get on that.
That also gets us into this question about gravity and its role, and the idea of dark energy. What's going on? If you have conservation of energy, first of all, what is energy? What is energy? It's defined as the ability of a system to do work, right? And because we haven't had this upper quadrant in classical physics, and we still have that legacy, we have a problem, because as energy does work, it degrades into a less usable state. And this is the heat death idea. And so then you say, okay, now what are we going to do? Well, let's create this idea called entropy, which is an index of the unusability of energy. Well, if you think about that, that's a complete oxymoron, because the definition of energy is the ability to do work, and entropy is taking away that ability. So it's really taking away the energy, but they don't want to say that.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah. And so what I say is that the energy, and you can index entropy, but what you're indexing is how energy is being transformed from the Q1 to the Q2, Q1 entailment into a non-local domain, which ends up being and I've done the space-time diagram, it ends up being non-local geometry of light. And it's a very simple calculation. That geometry ends up being an infinite fractal, which explains dark energy. and it explains the expansion of the universe without needing an additional concept of energy. So it's simply, so the conservation of information equates with the conservation of energy between the upper and lower.
Absolutely it does.
Yeah.
I'll
All
have
that's
to
just
listen to the last bit again.
Yeah. May I ask a question? I would like to. You hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah. I would like to. I will have to go in a while, so I would like to go away with a learning, a concrete learning. Let's say I'm going to send a message. I'm going to send like I need help. Yeah.
Mm.
But let's imagine that I'm not saying it, I'm writing it. So we take a very simple system made of letters. I will write help, meaning something to someone. How would you describe what's happening into your framework, John?
okay. So you write the letter in Q1, it becomes a material object, and you can transmit the letter. That's
No, but how? Sorry. I write letters. I'm writing help on my screen, which means I'm going to write a H made of 3 bars, and then I'm going to make a E and a L and a P.
right.
So it's a sort of it's a set of cycles, yeah.
Yeah, it's a material.
I'm assembling things to communicate something.
Okay, but let me explain how I would.
It's a code.
The
DNA is a code.
Yeah, the letter that which you wrote is ink and paper. It's a material pattern in Q1. It has absolutely no meaning until it goes through as a structure S into a context. The upper part is context. When it goes into, all contexts are interpretive. And so now you take that pattern and it's interpreted by the context. For instance, if I took an airplane and I stuck it into the Old West, which is a context, it would really be confusing to people. If I take a chair and I put it into the intertidal zone of the ocean, the context that is maintained by all the living creatures there would treat it differently than our context as humans treat it. So whenever you take a material object and put it into a context, it takes on new functions. You take a screwdriver out of the shop and you put it in the kitchen, and suddenly it has the function to help you open cans or something rather than turn screws. So that's the idea there. So the writing of the letter is material, but then it gets translated into meaning in because of the context in Q4. Once it has that meaning, then it can evoke formal cause functions, and so it can then drive new action. And so if the right person reads your message help, who has an interpretive context and understands what it means, knows English, for instance, then they can say, ooh, in Q3, somebody called for help. That means we need to form some action. There's a function created to form that action in Q2. And in Q2, somebody calls the fire department. And then they show up and do things in Q1.
Mm-hmm. And why it's the cycle is counterclockwise. Why are Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 the other way?
Okay, that's a great question, and I wrestled with that a lot. Yeah, in different frameworks, people number things differently, and we tend to number it from the bottom to the top, and so we think of the higher number as being the higher cause. That's one idea. The other reason is that the cycle actually goes in both directions. And the direction I'm showing is a direction of causality. The other direction is the direction of inquiry. So if you have a thing, you know, suddenly I present an airplane or whatever, and you say, well, where the heck did that come from? And now you back up to Q2 and say it came from a factory. And well, where the heck did the factory come from? Well, that came from somebody's design and plan in Q3. There was a engineering design for the airplane. Well, where the heck did the design come from? Well, that came from somebody's vision in Q4. And that's why and then also the other reason is if I start from the bottom and number up in the direction of inquiry rather than direction of causality, then I get Q5 as representing the whole, and then I get to buy my next car.
I'm going to have to leave this one because I've got the police want to talk to me because I was on a bridge the other day and somebody jumped off and they want to know why.
Okay. But that was great. That was a great session.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to.
Yeah.
Gary, I'm going
Thank
to
you.
listen to the recording because there was